Okay, so thanks again for taking the time out of your very busy
Sure.
schedule to do this interview with us. I thought we'd start off, obviously, given the various important roles that you've played within the US-India corridor. I thought we could start off with your thoughts on the US-India FTA. Now, we're obviously seeing an increased interaction between the US and India across several sectors, and surely the US-India FTA has seems to be coming on the back of that. But what, in your opinion, do you think are some of the challenges that these two countries need to address in order to broaden this trade agreement?
I think we should break it down. One is FTA and one is a trade deal. Obviously, at this stage, FTA is not in play from a short-term perspective, but a trade deal, a small trade deal, is in play. And the issues are more coming from the US side rather than India. India has really stepped up when I look at all the details in regards to the trade deal. They have agreed on contentious issues like price control on medical devices. They've agreed on issues in regards to ag access, in dairy access, and I think where the challenge is, US had basically suspended GSP preference to Indian goods of $6.5 billion worth of exports. And India is insisting that that should be restored. And to restore that, US is saying, give us $6.5 billion worth of more business, buy more US goods. And I think that's where the gap is. And both sides are working on it. And hopefully before the election, we should have a small trade deal.
Thanks, Mukesh. So let's talk a little bit about the Quad. You recently pitched for an economic partnership deal between the Quad, and I was just wondering whether you could share some of the benefits of this sort of FTA that could come across, and besides, well, obviously, checking the over-reliance on China.
Well, what we see is a aggressive and assertive stance by China as the world settles down post-COVID. And one thing which has come out very clear is that China wants to be the dominant country in Asia. It does not want any other country to play a role. And that means if it has to marginalize countries like India, it will do that. And we have seen that its aggressive stance with India, especially in Ladakh and the border region itself. I think to maintain an international order, rule of the law, it is important that countries unite together to ensure that happens. And if countries such as China would like to not play by that rule, then I think there's a cooperation, coordination, and consultation among these countries to ensure that there are rules of engagement which stay on. And if those rules are not there, then we basically get into a dog-eat-dog world. And this becomes more like 15th, 16th centuries when pirates would go land in a land and basically say, this is my land. And you don't want that scenario coming in as we move forward. And I think India, US, Japan, and Australia having a quad to make sure that the Indian Pacific Ocean remains open, and so ships and other goods can transit across different geographies. That's important. And as these countries, the four countries cooperate, it also makes sense that the the security is not just tied to purely defense. Security also percolate down into the economic zones also. And so it's important the four countries start cooperating on the economic area. And when I say economic, it's not just pure trade. You look at technology. For example, India went and banned 59 Chinese apps in India. And India is seriously considering not using Huawei 5G technology, just like US has done. And UK also announced. And Australia did announce among the first countries. And Japan is also saying they will not use it. So I think there has to be some kind of technology pact between the four countries to move into this direction of FTA. And I think, I know there are issues on the agriculture side, there are issues on other areas, but on technology, there's more coordination, more cooperation. So as a first baby step beyond defense is have a technology FTA among the four countries. And what it does is a win-win proposition. Because when you look at India has roughly 800 million smartphone users. US has over 300 million. And then you have Japan, which has a large population. If you just combine the four countries, it becomes the largest block of smartphone users. And that's where Huawei, 5G is going to play an important role. I think it's also important to understand among the four countries, innovation comes a lot from small countries like Australia. And that innovation can be tested and sold into a larger market, which is India, as India gets more self-sufficiency and economic per capita grows also. From a Japan perspective, it is looking for investment. It has excess capital, and it can basically look at India from an infrastructure perspective. So I think when you look at from all four countries, there is a win-win value proposition beyond the defense quad which we have. And that's why my statement on economic FTA is important, because I think unless we start pushing four countries in the direction, it's not going to happen.
Let's talk a little bit about the energy sector. Now, the US and India have had growing sort of alignment towards the energy sector, surely, but India has also always kind of been very careful to maintain this balance between the US and its relationship with Iran. Now, with the recent Iran and China alignment, how do you see the energy cooperation between US and India changing in that context, and sort of impact that this would have?
Well, India imports almost 86% of its energy requirement. Today, United States is a net exporter of energy. And this is not just fossil fuel, it's also renewable. And it is important to understand today, India has roughly around 8 days of energy reserves. And for any nation, it has to have roughly 100 days to bring that sense of security. And India is looking at US as an area where it will go and store its oils to have a safeguard against price fluctuation, demand, and other flare-ups which happen and drives the cost of energy up and down. So I think it's important to understand that when you look at a defense alignment, it also makes sense to look at energy alignment between the two countries. India has been dependent on Iran. At some stage, it was getting almost 30% of its oil from Iran, and today it's down to almost zero. And I think for Iran to sign up a alliance with China sends a message to India that you cannot depend on Iran for its energy requirement. And more important is you have to understand the Chabur port, which India has invested, and the rail line on that, which India was going to build, has been given to the Chinese. So what happens is the impact of Iran and China alliances does cut India's access to Afghanistan, because that's how it was getting access to. So India has to look at how to manage that. But it is a new threat to India, and India has to basically leverage US more and more from an energy cooperation perspective. And I think it's important to India to also look at beyond and start investing more in the renewable, so at least its dependence on import comes down, because 86% of your energy requirement being imported is high risk value proposition. Now people will say, hey, listen, Japan does much higher, but Japan is a developed country, whereas India is a developing country. It cannot afford interruption and price escalation, which does have an impact on domestic environment. So I think you will see more and more cooperation between India and the United States on the energy side.
Talking about exports, particularly from the US, or rather US exports, let's talk a little bit about US universities. Now, certainly US universities are facing a lot of disruption, as are universities around the world, particularly with the coronavirus pandemic and the sort of decreasing student numbers, which are and a direct impact of that. Now, from 2004 to 2012, over 1,500,000 Indian students put in more than 5 billion US dollars into the US economy, from tuition to living expenses alone. Yet, the US government has suspended the F1 and J1 visa programs. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's silly. And the reason I say that, it's not the economic aspect of the education market. You have roughly 1 million international students which are in the United States. Over 200,000 are Indians, and typically they contribute $7 to $8 billion in the local economy. And $7 to $8 billion in a $22 trillion economy does not have much of an impact. But more important is you have to understand 50% of them, if they go back to India or to respective countries, they become goodwill ambassador of the United States. So they basically have a cultural impact, and they generate the sense of, if I use the word, fondness towards the United States, its value system, its culture, its American football and baseball, because you go through the whole college program itself. So to me, that's a bigger loss rather than the financial loss itself. And so it's politics which seems to be driving this. Universities sued the Trump administration on that. They backed off, realizing that they can't enforce it. In our vision, we like to see this 200,000 Indian students in the United States to go up to 500,000. You have to understand, we have a shortage of STEM graduates in the US. 70% of the Indian students who come into the US join in the STEM program. And when you look at in the PhD program, the largest number on a percentage basis are Indian itself. And we have a shortage of 1 million software engineers in the US. And so if we can recruit them, they make US companies innovative, they make them competitive, and basically they also do large number of startups. 75% of the startups have some kind of an Indian connect to it, the students, founders, investors itself. So I think beyond the financial loss, it's a bigger loss to the goodwill standing of the US around the world. It's a bigger loss to US companies because they're able to recruit some talented individual. And the strength of America has always been immigrants. And if you bring in a immigrant which day one becomes tax-paying citizen, it's a plus factor for the United States. So I think we basically are very, very supportive of opening the market and ensuring that more students come in, more H-1B visas are issued, and more OPT is issued, because it helps strengthen US economy.
Let's talk a little bit about manufacturing now. India has clearly put forward its aim or goal to become the factory of the world, taking over from China. So, what do you think, in your opinion, can India, the government and Indian businesses do in order to attract more investment from American companies that are, actively looking to diversify their supply chains and sort of attract that sort of investment into India in manufacturing?
Well, the boardroom discussion in the US is China is going to get more and more belligerent, and it's going to put a lot of pressure on US companies in China. And so, what is your China plus one strategy? And US companies also will not abandon China. It's a large market. So they will continue to manufacture, but they'll continue to manufacture for the Chinese market in China itself. And anything which is going to be export oriented, they will go to the region itself. Some companies are onshoring back to the US, but a large numbers are exploring other geographies. And I've seen studies where they did a study of 56 companies which moved out of China, and 53 ended up in Vietnam, and around 3 ended up in India itself. So I think when you look at why is it they've gone to Vietnam and why not India, um, one of the biggest factor is ease of doing business. While we basically say that India has improved on the World Bank ease of doing business, but you have to understand that that analysis done between only two cities, which is Delhi and Mumbai, and most of the manufacturing does not go to Delhi and Mumbai. They go beyond into other states itself. So I think India has to look at from perspective of how do you basically improve ease of doing business, and that means issues of labor laws, land acquisition. More important is trying to get permits on electricity, trying to build buildings, trying to deal with tax authorities. Those are the issues which have to be eased. And more important is making sure there's a sanctity of the law, because 2 years ago, Andhra Pradesh changed the government and they canceled all international contract. That sends a very wrong message to the investors, because investors are saying, I'm looking for a long-term investment. And especially institutional investors, which come with big dollar item, are looking at 20, 30 years projection of the investment. And the other thing which I think India has to look at, which is a phenomenon which is taking place, what you call as ESG factor, which is the environment, social, and governance factor. Investors are saying, we will put in our money in companies and countries which have certain respect for the environment, certain social guidelines, and social governance method. And we did an analysis out of $48 trillion of investment out there. $14 trillion today has come under the gambit of ESG factor. That means in the year to year, almost a 38% rise, and it'll continue. So I think India has to position for the future, and beyond ease of doing business, it has to look at the ESG factor to attract institutional investors into the country.
Thanks, Mukesh. And this is my final question to you today. What do you see, or which way do you see the US-India partnership moving post-pandemic? What do you think would be the highlights of that sort of relationship in a post-pandemic world?
I think the relationship will move much more in a positive way, and you will see more collaboration, cooperation between the two countries. India has a bipartisan support in the US, regardless of Republican or Democrat. And the relationship is not just defense or trade. It is on technology area, is student to student, but more important is people to people. You have 4 million Indian Americans, the most affluent minority group. They contribute the most on a per capita basis to political campaign. And on a per capita basis, more are running for the offices in the US. So you'll see the relationship getting stronger and stronger as time goes by. And it showed during the pandemic also how India was able to, at the request of US, open up its exports of hydroxychloroquine and other stuff to the US. And US in return shipped quite a few of ventilators to India. So I think the relationship, regardless of politicians or diplomats or businessmen, is very much tied people to people also. So I think the relationship will reach a higher plateau and get strengthened further itself.